In this lesson, we'll build out this portfolio site using all the new Webflow features. I'll leave a link to the Figma and Webflow files in the description below if you'd like to follow along. So to get started, let's set up our style guide and we'll head over to variables and set up the colors first. So I'll just select this dark section here and copy its hex code, and I'll plug that in as my dark color for the site. And then I'll select this orange section here, copy its hex code, and plug that in as the orange color for the site. And I'll also head over to all headings, which is right here, and I'll set all my headings throughout the site to be uppercase, and that way we're just capitalizing all of them. And I'll change all of my headings weight to be regular, and that way it matches what our style guide had here. And let's also set our main font family, primary family. So if we scroll down to all our fonts, which is right here, we can go ahead and set our primary family to be this Clash Grotesque. And one other thing we should set is our radius. So I changed the radius small to be 0.25 rem just to make it a little smaller. And with that, our style guide is set up. So let's build out this hero section. We'll head over to our home page in Webflow and let's delete this placeholder hero, and we'll select the body under settings, and let's go ahead and give it an attribute of data theme and a value of dark. So that makes the whole page dark. And then inside our page main, let's drop in a starter full component. So this starter full has a bunch of component fields for themes, padding top and bottom, and all of our elements. Instead of recreating those fields for each section we create, we can just use that starter full as a starting point. So we can duplicate it and we can rename this to be something like section hero and create. And now if we drop that section hero in, it has all those component fields already for us, and we can just open it up and start building. So we'll call this hero wrap on the section. On the container, we'll say hero contain. We'll give it a uContainer utility so it has a max width and padding. And let's delete this background video and image. Let's delete this eyebrow. We'll delete the paragraph. Out of the button group, we only need the first button element. And we'll go ahead and set this visual to hidden for now, and this button to our outline style. So if we head over to our section and then go to props, we have a bunch of fields for all the elements we just deleted. So we can delete all the background visual fields. We can delete the button 2 fields. We'll delete the button group, the paragraph, and basically everything we're not using, this eyebrow. And this is still faster than recreating all these other fields from scratch. Also, under this custom code, let's drop our grid guide component so we have some guides. And inside this container, let's drop a div with the class of hero layout, and we'll give it a uGrid desktop. So it's a 12 column grid on desktop, and right below desktop, it'll automatically change to a vertical flex so that our image will just stack underneath our content. Now this content block is 6 columns here. Let's go ahead and drop in a div. We'll give it the class of hero content, and we'll give it a column 6 utility so it spans 6 of those columns. And inside that content, we have this top part for the heading and button, and bottom part for the thumbnails. So let's drop a div with the class of hero header. And let's go ahead inside that and add a div of hero title to hold our title element. So we'll just put this heading component in since it's already linked up to component fields, and we'll move it to be above our button component, which is also linked up. Now let's give this hero title a utility of uTextH1 so it has the right font size. And we're going to want to align the content inside to the left center. So let's go give it a vertical flex of left on X and center on Y. And we'll give it a gap of small to space the elements apart. Now we'll also drop in a list element, and we'll give this a class of hero. We'll call it thumbnail list. And we'll give this a uGrid custom, and that way it doesn't have any automatic responsiveness. We can just control what it does for every breakpoint. So let's set this to be a 3 column grid across all breakpoints. We'll select this item, give it a hero thumbnail item class, and we'll give it a uVisual wrap. That way it has a position relative, overflow hidden, border radius, and aspect ratio. And that way it can contain our absolute visual component. And this visual component, when the image is still loading in, has a skeleton placeholder background, just so we can see that something's going to load there. Let's give this a ratio. Our images are 210 wide by 120 tall. So let's go ahead and give this a custom ratio. We'll do 2.1 width and 1.2 height. And let's delete these other items, and we'll go ahead and just duplicate this one. We'll select this component and we'll link it to a field. So we'll call this something like thumbnails, and this can go ahead and be our image, and we'll go ahead and call this something like thumbnails image 1. So we'll just put everything in that thumbnails folder. So we'll call this thumbnails image 2. Let's go ahead and set that up. And once we have that set, we'll also create one for thumbnails image 3. And then that way we can change out each of these images like so, and that'll be good to go. So inside this layout, let's also drop a div for our main visual, and this can be hero visual wrap. And we'll want to give this a column 5, so it spans 5 columns, but we want it to start on the 8th column here, so it's pushed over by a column. So we'll change this to start 8. And inside of that, I'll have an extra div for maintaining the aspect ratio. That way I'm not stacking things on top of this column here if I can avoid it. So I'll call this visual ratio, and I'll give this a U visual wrap so it has the aspect ratio. And the ratio here is going to be about 550 wide by 630 tall. So let's give it a custom ratio, width of 5.5 and height of 3.6. And inside of that, let's just add this global visual that's already linked up to component fields for us, so we can have a background or an image, and we'll just enable that. And also this grid is stretching the two children to be equal heights. So it's stretching this content to be as tall as the visual wrap. But if we ever had a lot of content in this side, this child wouldn't grow to be full height of its parent here. So we want to make sure that this ratio has a height of 100%. And it'll just be our ideal aspect ratio here, but if the content ever got taller, it'll grow in height to match. So now that we have that set, we're going to want this to be able to grow and fill all the space, this block right here. So to do that, we'll select this content, and we'll give it a vertical flex that stretches on X and aligns to top on Y. And that allows us to select this header and apply a flex grow so it fills all that space. And we never want this button to touch the image, so let's go ahead on the content and add a gap small just to space them apart like so. And that way when everything wraps, that'll just look good to go. Now let's set up our default content. So if we head to our section, head to props, we can select any of these component fields like image 1 and just plug in an image here. And this way when the client drops in any section, it'll automatically be filled with some content, and they can replace the content, of course, if they want, but they don't have to repopulate this content each time they add in the hero section. And let's open up this header, and so let's go ahead and just copy this text, and we'll go ahead and paste it right into here, and we'll just bold the last word so we can change its style. And let's select all of this text, and we're going to set it to H1 by default since this is a hero component, but that can be switched if this component is used later down the page on a different page. So let's go ahead and drop in a global heading just outside of all this, and let's go ahead and detach it for a minute, and we'll go ahead and bold a word inside of this. And what we're going to do is select that bolded word, and we'll style all bolds, but only when they're inside of this global rich that we're using for all our headings. And let's go ahead under custom properties and change its font weight, and we'll set that to inherit, so it just inherits from its parent's font weight instead of actually being bold. And then we can go ahead and change its text color here to be brand. And that way any bold text we have inside any of our global heading components will just have that style. Let's also set up the ideal line wrap that we're looking for here. So this heading should wrap right after the word design. So if we open up our component and we head to props on our heading max width, that's set to none by default, but let's set that to 12 ch. So roughly 12 characters per line, and that sets our ideal max width there. And if we use this same component on different pages and change its heading, we can also adjust that max width to whatever we need for that instance. Let's also go ahead and set our default button text. So if we open that up, we can go ahead and say something like view our work. And let's go ahead and set our main visual file here, and we'll go ahead and plug that in right here. And let's go ahead and open our button component. And on this button text, let's set some of our preferred styles here. So we'll go ahead and set a U text of small. So we're applying a small font size, and we'll override the text small font size to be uppercase in this particular case. And let's also add a weight medium just to bold it a little bit. And that'll be our default button styles. So that's really everything for our responsive hero section component. So let's build out this nav as well. And our nav has a blend mode attached so that whenever we cross into a light section, it kind of inverts here. We want that blend mode to apply to the logo and the menu button, but not the menu content. So let's go ahead and build this out. Inside Webflow, right under our grid guide, we can drop a Webflow nav bar, and let's go ahead and give this a class of nav wrap. We can't apply the blend mode to this nav wrap because then it would blend the menu content as well, which is not what we want. So we'll have to apply a blend mode to a child. And for that blend mode on the child to invert based on the whole page color, that means this parent would need static. So it basically is ignored and the child blend mode will invert off the parent. Let's remove the default background color that comes on the native Webflow nav bar. We'll make that transparent. And inside, we don't want to use the native Webflow container because it has a hidden before and after element that can mess up any flexbox we apply to the container. So we'll give this a class of nav contain, and we'll give this a U container so it has the padding and max width. And let's also just zero out the top and bottom padding. So we'll detach this. We'll hit 0, option enter for top and bottom, and let's give it a min height of 5 rem, and that way it just has a size there. And we're not going to use this brand link because it has a default font color, so we'll drop our own link block in instead. That way we just have our own here. And let's give this a class of nav logo wrap, and let's go ahead and give it under settings, under attributes, we'll give it an aria-label, and we'll say go to homepage. And this is what screen readers will read whenever a user focuses on the link, so they know where this will go. And we'll go ahead and select this logo, copy as SVG, and inside the link block, we'll launch SVG import app. If you don't have that, you can add it under apps here, and we can just click in here and paste. So we have our SVG, and we'll go ahead and turn this SVG into a component since we're using it in other places. That way, if the logo ever changes, we only had to update one component. And let's give this link block a width. We'll do something like 7.5 rem. And we'll also have this menu button inside of this nav contain. Now, the menu button currently is only showing up on tablet breakpoint and below. So we want to adjust our nav here to make sure our menu button shows on desktop, and that'll hide the menu content by default. And we can go ahead on this container and apply a horizontal flex that spaces between on X and aligns to center on Y, just to center all that up. And then on the button, we can add a nav, we'll call this button wrap. And inside of that, we can go ahead and drop a text block, and we'll call this nav button text. And let's give it a U text of small, and let's give it a weight of medium. And let's go ahead and change this text to say something like menu. And let's delete this default icon. We'll add our own. So we'll just copy this icon element here as an SVG, and we'll launch SVG import, and we'll just paste in that icon here. We'll give it a class of nav button icon, and it had a width of 22 pixels. So divided by 16, that is about 1.3 rem. And we want to apply flex to stack the icon next to the text. But because we're using the native button element for Webflow, that doesn't actually work. So we will need an extra div in here. We can say nav button layout, and we can let that layout hold our text and hold the icon together. So we can have those two things there. And once we do, we can go ahead and apply the layout to this here. So let's select this layout. We'll give it a horizontal flex that aligns to left and center. And we'll give this a gap of extra small just to space the elements apart like so. Now, once we have that set, let's select this button wrap and zero out all that default padding. And we'll want to select this nav bar and give it a position of fixed. So we'll do that on the main class here, position fixed to the top. We'll give it a high Z index like 1000. And so this will stay with us while we scroll, and then we can go ahead and give it a blended mode under effects here of difference. So that way it just inverts whatever its parent color is. And just to see this in action, I'll go ahead and duplicate this section. So I have another dark one. I'll duplicate it again and switch this one over to light. And to get these component buttons here, instead of having to type it, you could add the Lumos Chrome extension. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. And I'll go ahead and duplicate this. So I have a couple light sections, a couple dark, and now we'll see this logo whenever we scroll into a light section is just inverting based on that parent. So all that is good to go. Now our menu content is outside of that contain, and that way it doesn't have any sort of blend mode attached. So let's just delete the original container. We'll keep our menu. We'll call this something like nav menu wrap, and it's going to need a position of fixed because it's not inside the fixed container. So we'll position fixed to the top right. We'll give it a z-index of 999, so it's right underneath this container content. And let's just see what it looks like with our whole menu open. So we'll want to give this nav menu wrap a height. We can try 100 VH so it fills the screen height. And we'll also want to give it an overflow of auto, so on shorter screen heights we can scroll inside of this. Now this button element has a default background color whenever the menu is open, and that's just courtesy of native Webflow styling. So let's go ahead and clear that out. And let's make sure that its font color, because it has a default font color when open, is set back to inherit from its parent like it normally would be. And then on this menu here, let's give it some top padding. We'll try 5 rem, or yep, that looks good. And then on the bottom, we'll try 5 rem as well. And that way we just have padding top and bottom. We'll give it a width like 26 rem, so it has a size, and a max width of 100%, so on smaller screens it doesn't overflow. Now inside of this menu, we're going to need to have a list element for accessibility. So let's just drop in a list element, and let's go ahead and give this a class like nav menu list. And then for the item, it'll be nav menu item. And then inside of that, we'll have a link, and we'll go with a text link, and we'll call this something like nav menu link. And let's give that nav menu link 100% width display block. And let's give it a text align to the left. We'll also give it some padding, and I'll go with my padding horizontal variable, and I'll hold shift enter so it applies to all sides. So what that's doing is making the padding horizontal here match the padding horizontal there, so that when this stacks on mobile it all looks good. And the text color, of course, we want to change that back to inherit, just to clear all those sort of default styles coming from Webflow. It looks like the text color is actually on this menu wrap. So let's go ahead and set that back to our theme text. So we're clearing that default style from Webflow, and we'll set its background to our theme background. And that way everything's good to go. And let's also, since this is dark on dark, give it a border here, and we'll go with our border width variable. And for the color, we'll go with our theme border color, which is a light gray. And on this link, let's add a bottom border of border width, and let's add a border color of theme border, so it has a light gray bottom border. And we can just duplicate this item, and we can change out these links. So this one could say home, this one could say something like about, and then we could have one for contact. And that way this menu is fixed, so it'll stay with us while we scroll, but it is actually not inverting like the rest of the content. And one other thing we'll notice, let's just close out this menu for a second and let's preview. So if we just try and open this here, it's sliding from the bottom. Let's actually have that slide, instead of drop down, we'll say overwrite. And that way it just slides in this way, and that looks good to go. Let's delete these extra hero sections we don't need, and let's select this nav, and we'll turn the nav wrap into a component. We'll just call this nav. And let's create this next simple text section. And for that one, we're just going to use a starter simple. So there's a starter full with all the component fields and a starter simple, which doesn't have all those extra fields. And I'll just duplicate this one, and I'll call this section mission, and I'll go ahead and create. So now inside the page main, we can drop in our section mission, and it only has the theme padding top and padding bottom. So inside that, I can go ahead and give this a class of mission wrap. And if I apply this class, I can hit my right arrow key and the Lumos Chrome extension returns the class of the parent. I'll call this mission contain, and I'll throw in a U container class so it has the padding and max width. And inside that, I'll just add a regular H2. I'm not using rich text here because I don't need a custom max width or to bold any words inside. And I'll give this a class of mission title. And we can go ahead and give this a text transform of uppercase like so. And let's also give it a bottom border, and we'll go with our border width variable, and we'll give it a border color of our theme border. And let's give it some bottom padding of space extra small. And let's give it some bottom margin of something like space medium to space it apart from the text under it. And under that, we'll just drop in a custom element, and we'll give this a class of mission text. And we'll give it a U text H4 so it has a larger font size. And let's just go ahead and copy this text that we were using here. And we can go ahead and add it right here for the text. But we're going to change the tag here to be span. And the reason for that is when we add this margin to a span, it's only going to push over the first line of text, which is what we want here. So if we were to add a custom margin value, we can use a column width variable that's available in Lumos. If I hit the tab key, the Lumos extension wraps it in a var for me, and that pushes it by a single column width. In this case, I want to push it by 2 columns, so we'll do column width, and we'll say times 2. And when I hit the tab key, Lumos extension wraps it in a calc and variable for me, and that pushes it over by 2. So now I'm not going to link this text to component fields, because if the mission changes on one page, then it should really change on every page. This text doesn't change per page that it's on. But I will set the padding top to none for this particular instance. And if we had it on another page and we were using it in light and it was following a dark section, we would change that. But this way we can control all of those things. Let's build out our feature section. So we'll go ahead and duplicate this section starter full, and we'll call this something like section features. And let's create. And right under the mission, let's go ahead and add our feature section, and we'll go ahead and edit this component. Let's delete the background visual. Let's go ahead and delete the eyebrow. We'll delete everything except the first button, and we'll also delete this main visual here. And so once we have that set, we'll head to the section, and let's remove our unneeded component fields. So the background visual, the main visual can go away, the button 2, the button group, and also the eyebrow. So once we have that set, let's go ahead and drop or name this something like features wrap. And then we'll go ahead and name the container features contain, and we'll give it the U container class, and we'll drop inside of that a div of features layout. And for this layout, we have our content spanning 6 columns and this card wrapper spanning 6 columns. So it's a 50-50 split. Whenever we have even column sizes like that, we can use a U-grid auto fit, and this just automatically reduces when there's not enough space. So if the user increases their font size or on lower breakpoints, it'll wrap to be a single column grid instead of having to adjust this per breakpoint. So it's better for accessibility. And inside of that features layout, we can have our features content, and inside of that content we can add a div, and I'll just call this features title. And I'll go ahead and put the heading into that title, and I'll give the title something like a U text H1 so it has a larger font size. Inside the content, I'll also add a features text, and I'll add a U color of faded so it has a reduced opacity, and I'll put the paragraph into that, and I'll just put the button under those two things like so. And once we have that set, let's select the content and apply a vertical flex that aligns to the left and to the top. And let's give it a gap of small, just so it's spaced apart. Now on this button, let's go ahead and set it to our secondary style, and let's go ahead and adjust its padding top to be something like 0.5 rem. I'll hold Option and click, so padding top and bottom are changed. And let's also set our default content. So if we head over to our props, we can just copy over this content and we'll put it into our heading text like so. We'll leave this heading text set to H2 by default, and we'll go ahead and bold the first word in it. And let's set our ideal max width for this. So our max width, we'll try something like 10 ch, and that looks good. And let's also copy all of our paragraph text, and we'll go ahead and add it into this field here, and we'll just paste that in. And let's go ahead and bold, or maybe just make one of these words a link. So this was an option we wouldn't have unless we were using rich text, but because we are, these become much more flexible. And now we can go ahead and set this max width, something like 45 ch, and that's looking good there. So we need to determine at what point should this wrap to be a single column instead of two. And that's not going to be based on breakpoint. It will be based on column size. So if I just increase the size of this for a little bit, I'll notice right at 26 rem, it looks good, but anything smaller than that, I would rather it just break to be a single column grid instead of two column. So if we go ahead and edit our layout grid, we can change this, and we can say never let the columns get smaller than 26 rem. And before you do that, it'll just wrap onto a single column grid. Now we're also going to add inside the layout a component slot so that we can have however many cards we want in there. And we'll call this features list. And we're going to add a U-grid autofit on this as well, so it can be two columns and it can reduce to be a single column when there's not enough space, instead of tying that to breakpoint. And we would like this to be a list element, but we can't change the tag on the list. So for accessibility, if a list element is not possible, we can fall back to defining a role list. And on the child, it would be role list item. So we'll leave list on this one. And then we can go ahead and set up what we want our card to be. So we'll drop in, usually we would use a link block because this whole card is clickable, but that's not the best for accessibility, because when the user focuses on it, they have to read out the alt text of the image, the title, and the paragraph. Really, the only thing that should be a link is the main title of the card so that they know where they're going. So to do that, we're going to make the whole card a div instead of a link. And we'll go ahead and give this a class, something like features card wrap. And let's give it some padding, and we'll do something like, we'll go with our size 2 rem, and I'll hit shift enter to apply to all sides. I'll also give it a border radius of something like radius main. And let's also give it a position of relative, just so it can have absolute things inside. And we'll go ahead and give it, under attributes, a data theme of invert, so that if the section's dark, the card will be light. If the section's light, the card will be dark. And let's also give it that role of list item, so that when we do add it into the list, it has the correct setting. Let's also turn it into a component. So this is a features card. It should only ever be used in the features section, so we're naming it that way. And inside of that, we'll go ahead and add a slot for the icon. So we'll call this something like features card icon. And we want to give this a size. It looks like our icons are roughly 72 rem, so that is roughly 4.5, and 72 pixels, 4.5 rem. And let's also give this a flex that's vertical to the center, so that any icon we drop inside here will just be centered within that space. And on the main icon class, let's give it a text color brand, so any icon we drop inside will have the brand color. And then let's drop in a div, and we'll call this something like features card content. And inside of that, we're going to drop in a text link for the title of the card. So this should be what screen reader users focus on and what they read, so they know which page to go to. So we can set the text here, and we can call this features card title. And we would want to give it something like a U text of H4, so it has the right font size, like so. And then under that, we can go ahead and drop in either the global paragraph element if we want to use the rich text where they could bold certain words inside and set the max width and all those options. But in this case, just for time's sake, I'll use a regular paragraph element, and I'll call this features card text, and I'll give this the U color of faded, so it has the reduced font color there. And I'll go ahead and copy this default text, and inside of here, I'll go ahead and paste in the default. So copy from here and just paste it in here. There we go. So now let's set up our layout. So on this whole card, let's apply a vertical flex that aligns to left top. And let's go ahead and add a gap large to really space the icon and the text apart. And then on this content that holds the paragraph together, let's apply a vertical left top, and let's add a gap of something like extra small to really put the things closer. And so now that we have that set, we can go ahead and start building out the structure of our card. So we do want only this user focused to be the thing screen readers focus on, but we want our whole card to be clickable. And the way to do that is to add this global card link component. It's just a position absolute card link with a high Z index that covers the whole card and makes it all clickable. This also solves the issue of not being able to add slots inside of a link and accessibility issues, which are more important. And on this card, we've given it a RIA hidden so screen readers won't read it or be able to focus on it. It's just for people to be able to click on this whole card, but the thing they're reading and focusing on is this link here. So then we can link this title link to a field called link, and then we can go ahead and link the global card link component to the same field so that we only had to adjust the link in one place, and it will adjust this link and the absolute link. And we can also link the heading to this component field, and let's also link the paragraph to this component field while we're at it. So all that can be adjusted per card, and we'll go ahead and create. And so now we can take this card and we can paste it inside the features list, and inside this card slot we want an icon, so we could just copy this as an SVG, and let's go ahead and launch SVG import. Let's go ahead and paste this in, and let's turn it into a component. We'll call this icon star, and so that way we can use it in multiple places and pages throughout our site. And let's go ahead and copy this icon, and we'll copy as SVG, launch SVG import, and we'll paste it in. And let's go ahead and call this something like icon globe. And so now that we have that set, we can go ahead and create. And now inside of this component slot on the card, let's go ahead and drop in our icon, and we'll go with star for this one. Let's go ahead and duplicate the card, and because it's auto fit, it's now converted to a 2-column grid automatically for us. And let's go ahead and drop in our icon globe for this one. And we can also just go ahead and change anything about this. Let's go ahead and duplicate it actually. So I'll copy this card, paste it in, and copy this one and paste it in. And that way we can have as many cards as we want in this list. And what we should notice responsive wise is when we reach a wider screen here or less space, it automatically wraps, or it should wrap those cards like so to be a single column. And then right below that, it automatically wraps the whole list of cards under this. And it's not tied to a specific breakpoint. It's just tied to when there's not enough space for this heading. That's when it reduces space here. Now, for the cards themselves, I actually always wanted this to be a 2-column, not a 3-column. So what we'll need to do is reduce or increase the minimum size we want for our columns. So if I go over here on this specific list, I think we had a min size. We said never let our columns get smaller than 13 rem. And if we increase that a little bit more, like maybe we try 18 rem or something like that, then we should notice when we reach our full size, these things they don't get smaller than 18 rem, which is a good space. And actually, we could control it to where these two words never even wrap onto a new line. If we know the size at which they do that wrapping, then we could increase that minimum enough so that that never happens. So if I grab this list and I change this to maybe be 20 rem instead of 18, then what we should notice is that it shouldn't ever wrap that word. Yep, so the cards just stack before the word can wrap, which is really helpful because some of our cards have shorter headlines. And when the two cards are stacked side by side, if one of them is wrapping onto 2 lines and the other heading isn't, it could cause some misalignment and some weird, it could look a little strange. So this just makes it really responsive. And again, because it's not tied to breakpoint, when the user increases their font size, this becomes single column because there's not enough space. And when they increase it again, the cards just stack under this. And because there is enough space now for the cards, they go back to being a 2-column grid. And then on smaller mobile screens, they go back to being single. So this is just like a really clean, future-focused way to build responsive layouts that just automatically adapt to the space they have instead of to a certain breakpoint. And one other thing we'll want to do is when these things do wrap, we don't want the buttons so close to the cards like we're seeing here. So we can, since we're using utilities, we can do this from any breakpoint. On this, we can just add a gap, and we'll want to make sure that it's a row gap so it doesn't affect the columns at all. And we'll go with a row gap of large, and that just puts more space for when they stack under each other like so. Let's also build this CTA component. So on this feature section, we'll change it to be light. That updates the cards since they had data invert. And we'll also go ahead and just drop in let's just start from the starter simple. So if I just search starter simple, we'll go ahead and duplicate this, and we'll call this something like section CTA. So this is our CTA section, and we'll create. And then let's drop in the CTA section, and we'll go ahead and make this light real quick. Let's also just remove the top padding since it's already following a light section. And inside of this, let's go ahead and give it a class. So we'll call it CTA wrap, and we'll give the container something like CTA contain, and let's give it the U container class. And inside of that, we'll drop in a div to be the CTA card. So we'll call this something like CTA card. And we'll go ahead and give this let's give it a border radius, and we'll go with radius of main. And let's also give it some padding. So I'll go with maybe like size 2 rem on all sides. And I'll also give this a min height while we're at it. So let's give the card a min height of something like maybe 40 rem or something kind of taller. And we'll also give this a flex, and we'll go vertical flex that aligns to center and center. That way the heading and button just stack under each other and align to center. And on that base class, let's also do a text align center, so any content we drop in this card will be centered. Now, we don't want to do a data theme invert in this case because this is going to have white text and a dark background image. So no matter if the section is in dark mode or light mode, we always want this card to be dark. So we're going to give this a data theme dark. And just in case it ever is in a dark section, if this was an actual background image, we wouldn't need to worry about this. But since the background color of this image matches the background color of my section, I'm going to give it a light border just in case it ever is used in dark mode. That way it shows up there. And I'm also just going to give this a position relative and an overflow hidden. And that way I can drop in my global visual component inside of this. And this will just act as kind of a background visual here behind the content. So let me go ahead and drop in a div. I'll give this a class of, we'll call it something like CTA card title. And let's give this a U text, and I'll go with H1. And on this card title class, let's give it a position relative. That way it sits on top of the absolute kind of background image. And inside of that, we can just drop in our global heading component. And I'll go ahead and copy some of this text, and I'll edit it here. We'll go ahead and paste it in there. And let's go ahead and set the max width. I might try 10 ch or maybe 20. We'll try something like 15. And that looks good there. And right under that, I'll go ahead and add in a global button component. So we'll go with our button main, and let's copy this text here. So we'll select all, copy, and we'll paste it in. And let's also just give this a gap. And so we can go with gap small maybe to separate the two elements. And I'm going to assume that the CTA text and link is going to be the same on every page. So this is always going to point to the request a quote form. So I don't need to link that to component fields. And we have the background video URL here. I can just copy all that. So on this global visual element, I can turn the image off, and I can go ahead and enable the video and paste the video URL. And so that way we have this looping video element here. And lastly, we need our footer that's going to go outside of the page main. For that, I'm just going to use a footer from the Lumos component library. I'll go ahead and copy this one here, and I'll leave the link to this in the description below. And inside of the page wrap, I'll just paste this in. So we have our footer component, and I'll go ahead and give this footer, let's give it a data theme of light. We could link this to a component field on the footer if we want it to be dark on some pages and light on others. We can also give this a top border, which I think is what my design called for. So I'll apply on the whole section a border width of 1.5 and a color of theme border light. And on this child div, which is right here, we'll also go ahead and give it that theme border light. Let's head to this class and let's set the border color. We'll go ahead and set theme border for the color, actually, which is right here, theme border. And that way we get the light color there. And let's go ahead and replace this logo. So if we click on this logo element here, we can delete that SVG, and we can just drop in our logo component into the link block. So that way it uses the same logo we're using in the header, and all that is globally connected. And there we go. We have a fully responsive sort of website here. I will go ahead and convert this footer over to a component just so it can be used across multiple pages. But that's everything we need to build this fully responsive site in Webflow with all these sections and using components in a scalable way where the site can really grow as things expand. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll catch you in the next one.